Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Until we get a chair elected, which is number 4 on the agenda, maybe I'll just get things kicked off and kind of lead the discussion. The reason that we are where we are today is that I believe it was back in July, there was a group of council member, Osmus, myself, Sarah, Ike, some hired consultants, and Bruce Peterson that were meeting, set up by conversation that the council was a part of to review where a new city hall should be located. And through that process, what happened was a recommendation was basically brought to the council table, and there was a vote taken, and that vote was a 4-4 vote. And what ended up happening is, rather than the mayor breaking the tie, I chose to say, you know, let's wait until we have the retreat, let's talk about it, let's build some consensus on how we want to proceed, and then we would take it from there. So at the retreat, there was conversation about the city hall. It was not a lengthy conversation, it was fairly short, but we talked about city hall and how we wanted to establish that. Subsequent to that conversation, at the work session following the retreat, this committee was established or recommended by the council. The formal action took place at the council meeting establishing this working group, which we're calling City Hall Task Force. And so that's a little bit of history behind how we got to today. What I have requested is that we review the council retreat, the presentation of work completed by staff and Engen and Associates, and then look at how we want to proceed from that point. So before we get to that point, I just want to make sure, does anybody else have any questions about how we got to where we are today, those types of things, or anything going that way?
Are we going to discuss what happened, the community meeting that we had at the fire station?
Yes, I believe there are some.
Okay.
Now, I just received this just now too, so I have not
Okay.
looked through it, but I believe that in our documents that we received at the retreat, it talked about the findings that Engen and Associates had from that meeting.
Okay.
Correct, yes. Anything else? Okay, so with that being done, at the retreat as well, and again confirmed by the council, was the selection that we should be looking at a downtown location. So our first order of business is to solidify that, yes, we are looking at a downtown location for the city hall. And is there any question in regards to that, or do we want to open that discussion? Council has basically directed us to look at downtown locations, and I know Sarah has done extensive amount of work along with Ike in preparing some site stuff that was talked about at the retreat. So is there any disagreement on that, or any opinions that need to be talked about around that, Sean?
Well, not the concept of downtown, but as you see, I see a map up here behind it, which is very convenient. What are we defining in this body as downtown?
Well, we could certainly do that. What I had suggested, and I believe I suggested that at the council meeting in conversations with Mr. Holland, is basically it would be Highway 12 to the north, Candy High Avenue to the south, 1st Street to the east, and 10th Street to the west is the parameters. And the site locations that were talked about at the retreat all fall within those parameters, with the exception of one project that was not in the downtown area. So otherwise, all the other locations do fall within those parameters. And again, I'm going to go from memory, somebody help me, I'm probably going to miss some, but we talked about block 25, we talked about block 50, we talked about Rice Hospital parking lot,
Right.
we talked about the old Taco John's or across from Holiday, We talked about
The existing
this
site?
existing
This
site. Yeah.
existing site, and then I threw in there, we'll look at the fire station block as well.
Well, right, yeah, fire station.
That
Is,
we-
is block 25 is the parking lot
Block
just to the
25
east of Nelson
is
Laundry?
what we're calling the Nelson
Okay.
Laundry, and then the block
50
50
is library.
library parking lot of Bethel Church.
So from past conversations, I had the current city hall site.
Right.
Is that one of them?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay. And the Hardware Hay building, was that just mentioned?
We didn't mention that, we figured that was encompassing of this site location.
Okay.
And I
Block
thought that-
50, block
I thought
25,
that got sold, or that was taken off.
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
the Quick Trip site?
We talked about the Quick Trip site, but that has been sold. Quick Trip bought that, so that is no longer under consideration because Quick Trip owns that site.
but we did talk to them, and they're not interested in
Okay,
negotiations at this time.
okay.
Okay? Are we all good? So with that, I think what I would like to do then is that, so we do have confirmation that we do want to continue looking downtown. So then I think we're at the point now where we're reviewing council retreat work and the resulting notes from that. And I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Holland for that conversation.
Well, backing up here, I mean, when do you wanna review the sites? I mean, Sarah and I have, you know.
That will happen now,
Oh, okay.
because that was talked about at the retreat. That's council retreat work.
Okay. Well,
Yep.
I didn't make any formal notes on this. I mean, you know, at the council retreat, you know, I led the discussion trying to see if we could come to some type of consensus. Of course, we couldn't take any action at that time. You know, we've been working on this, actually going on a year, you know, talking about the pros and cons of the different sites. And, you know, I look back at myself, when we had that, community meeting at the fire station, and we listed the pros and cons of each of the sites, and then we narrowed it down to 2 sites, one on Highway 12, and, you know, this downtown site, our current site. And then, you know, we came to an impasse there that we, you know, split, and, you know, we couldn't go any further. And so therefore, I think that from the retreat, we did get a consensus, as we did here, that the mayor just reconfirmed that we're looking at a downtown site. Now, when we say that, that's what Sarah and I were working on, was basically getting some overheads here, and then we also have that one, that comprehensive map that I see Sarah's got open there, that kind of shows all the different sites. You know, each one of these sites, we'll pull them up one at a time, and you can ask questions, and we've even looked at, like on block 25, where the utilities are located, if there's any type of issues there. Obviously, some of these sites have, are adjacent to properties that would have to be purchased. Maybe even some demolition work. You know, there is no clear site, even if you consider block 50, where the, you know, the across from the library, that parking lot. I mean, that would still require, you know, some demo.
Let's try to get everybody on the same page here, so.
It's past those maps that you have
So it's
there.
this one here,
Nope,
or it's
keep
farther?
going, you'll see it, there's.
It's after block
it's
25?
green, there's green, yep, right there.
Okay, this one here?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the document that Mr. Holland is talking about right now. So if we get back into your packet.
Just before those,
There,
there is no.
yeah, there's no page number, it's back in, I'm gonna guess about 20 pages, 20, 25 pages.
Second set of maps.
This one?
This,
Yep, yep, so that way, yep. There you go.
And you know, I mean, the purpose of the downtown to me, and this is my own personal opinion, but I'll throw it, you've heard it before, but I think the vitality of the downtown is important, and one of the ways that we can do that, and if you remember my big map that I made last year showing how much is owned, by either the city or the county or the federal government in the downtown area, that it's really almost equates to 50%. And so if we're going to improve the downtown, then I think all of these sites are viable, opportunities for the city. It's, each one of them, and like I said, I'll repeat again, we'll look at each one of them, but obviously there's some cost difference between some that would require more demo, some have more parking than others, and things like that. And so I think, going back from the retreat, we talked about all of these things actually, and that's what kind of, the only really concrete result that we got out of the retreat was that we, one, want to have the city hall, two, that we want to have it downtown, and thirdly, is that we want to get it started this year. Does anybody disagree with that?
I'm not so hung up on time frame at this point. I think,
I think
we need to look at the sites, and then I think that's gonna move us that direction. There was consensus at the retreat that yes, that's what we wanted to do, but I think, we're working on this because that's what we wanna do.
But we want to start this year. Isn't that a goal?
That would be ideal.
Isn't that a
I think
goal?
Are we gonna have to, when it gets to the other projects, are we gonna have to pick which
We may,
major
that's-
project?
Right, and that's why I'm saying,
Yep.
I want to go this year, but, if it doesn't happen this year, I don't wanna end up where we were last year, where when we got to the impasse, we were at an impasse. And if we say it's gonna go this year, on January 1st of next year, then our work is done, because it didn't happen. I don't want that to happen. I want us to have a logical process. We're missing the old Taco Bell site that Rick Fagerly brought up.
That one was not included. I will get a map of that one.
The only thing that I guess that I would say is, this we can go ahead on, as well as the Robbins Island
Four Seasons.
Four Season building, where I think all the other ones are probably 2 or 3 years out. So that kind of a time frame.
Yeah, and I think that the
Makes
Invest
sense.
in Wilmer group will be bringing a recommendation on that. We had conversations yesterday about some other things on that, but I don't wanna muddy the waters with that. So I don't want us to get hung up on timeline. I want us to look at sites, which I think will then naturally lead us there. So, but last time we got hung up on timelines, and it really messed us up. When we got to the council, we got messed up because it was trying to get pushed too fast. We haven't done our due diligence, and so I wanna do our due diligence, and then it will organically come to the top. That's my opinion, but I'm only one person.
I would concur, planning is important, and we can plan, but if you have an execution at the end before we do adequate planning, you may miss some steps and may be doing some things that you shouldn't be doing. So I like, if you have a goal, goals are great, but we have to do the front end planning to make sure it's done right. And if that gets us this year, kudos. If it does not, at least we're doing the planning stages and we're gonna do it in a thoughtful process. I think we can all agree we wanna do it thoughtful, intentional, and do it right.
Sure.
And if that
Sure.
happens in a time schedule that makes one happy, then great. And if not, we know that we've done a good job. That's what we were trying to do. So.
Sure. Okay. Well, Mayor, that's really all I have to say about the, as far as the retreat and the results of that.
So, Kathy, go ahead.
One of the things I was hoping that we would cover is taking a look at the priorities that the council set. These are important in identifying the location for the building, and to make sure that we've got all those priorities and to see if there are any others. So can I share with you all what was on the document?
Sure.
Do we have,
And this
is that in here?
I asked Ike to send it to me. So this is, you would recognize this as the work that we did at the retreat. So in regard to form and function, the items that were referenced is co-locate with the utility administration. I think that another time we need to have a conversation about that. Public safety heads co-located with others, interdepartmental efficiency, all city departments under one roof with a question mark, and determine the footprint and the size. And then under features and amenities, it was the council chambers on site, access to technology, question whether it should be a rental business versus we own it, if it needs to be connected to the auditorium, to be a one-stop shop, and high-end residential with a question mark, so we want residential with it. Then the accessibility, parking, traffic flow and ease to get to, and visibility. Miscellaneous were to stimulate other economic development and a new legacy left for the community. The least amount of tax loss, and to give clear direction to staff regarding the auditorium. So I'd like us to just, at some point, recognize those comments, and we're gonna need to decide what is and what isn't important, and what are our priorities out of all of that, and then are there any other priorities that we're missing? I think if we set our priorities, then it will be easier to identify that location based on those priorities.
Yeah, and at the retreat also, Councilmember Meske had said that there was no flavor on the Municipal Utilities Commission to co-locate at this time.
Well, they had told us that. And
Right.
they are, obviously they put their project off a bit now, but they still have the same requirements they have always had. And when we are restricted to the parameters that you've defined as downtown, none of those conform to what they're asking for. So that's why I say that seems moot at this point. They've made it very clear what their priorities are, and when we have dedicated to the parameters again defined here, there's no properties at work.
So when we're talking about the one-stop shop, is that those two entities?
No, that one.
I know we
talking
talked
about-
about licensing
You
at
can-
one point.
Yep, about having all of the abilities that citizens can come to a city hall and get all those things, so you don't have to have some citizens drive out to the community center, and some of them will have to drive out to the civic center, some drive to Public Works and so on, that we have all of those abilities to have that housed under one roof. And then people did point out, if I recall at the time, that technology may help solve that, and more of those activities could be done with a smaller footprint, if I recall the conversation.
Correct. And that's what was talked about. I think the other piece that was talked about with that is that there would be representation of all work groups within the facility, but that didn't necessarily mean that the department directors for each of those work groups would be housed in that facility. So when you talk technology, it might be something like, we have the ability to have the fire chief working in his office at the fire station to be able to have a conversation with an individual at City Hall, either through some type of a link to where it could be like ITV or something like that, but the technology would connect that, so it would be more than just a phone call connection. That's what I was hearing being said. I might be wrong. But the other thing, on a sidebar conversation that we had that day, that I had with an individual during the break, I'm trying to remember who it was, I think it was Andrew, but we talked about how, you might have a clerical person representing one of those departments actually working at City Hall, where the department director would be either at the fire station or at the police department. But we didn't solidify that at all. It was just a conversation of things that could happen in theory. I like to use the example. My sister-in-law works in St. Louis Park for a company in the state of Virginia on a project in Texas, working for NASA out of Florida. But she works in St. Louis Park. So technology allows us to do that. And we have, and our technology should allow us to do that as well throughout our community. That's what I heard being said.
If I could, I'd like to add a couple more items to that list, and one would be whether or not we're displacing our employees. If we're building on the current site, we're gonna have to have another site to in the meantime, and to consider the cost of doing that. The cost of the site, I think, is another issue, and the work that would need to be done to prepare a site for construction, so I think those would be reasonable things to look at also.
Okay, sounds good. Any comments other than, is it possible to get that document with the updated things that Kathy added for our next meeting or sent out to us electronically?
Sure. Yeah, it's actually, I
it's-
got it,
Yeah.
okay.
It's also in our packets for Monday's council meeting, everybody's getting the complete packet.
Well, if we would have a copy of that though, and if there are additional things other members would like to add to that list, that would be very important. So,
Right.
I mean, we have the council retreat to start as a template, but as you've added some, maybe others want to do that as well.
And I think as you look through the book here, you'll see where Julie and I and the mayor, we went through these steps that you're talking about. And that's what we did when we were selecting sites. And so we went through that process. But I think with this new group that we need to refresh that and do it again, because I agree with you, Kathy, that, you know, we have to have a consensus of what are we gonna measure? You know, what's important and what we're gonna measure, and to me, that's very important because these things can become an emotional response versus a measurable response. And so I totally agree with that, and so I think that that should be something that we should, as we progress here in our meetings, that should be one of the first things we establish.
So, Fernando, do you have anything at this point?
No, I'm agreeing with everything that's being said. I think eventually, I think we should put some sort of values to our priorities, and then each of us rank and tally up the values and say, okay, these are the top three, these are the bottom three, let's work on the top three, or something like that. I think we have to, a lot of it's gonna be verbal until we start to assign some sort of value to the parameters that we want. And I think that'll help us kinda narrow things in.
Certainly.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, yeah. Yeah, it's a very good way of building consensus.
I could send out a list of all the task force members with what we have now, and then we can add to it, and then have that at the next meeting. Does that sound, and if people could respond back, does that sound good?
Well, okay. I just didn't know if we start going through each one of the sites today, we might eliminate some.
Well,
Right, we will, I know we will eliminate one
there's
right
some
away.
low-hanging fruit, right?
I know we're gonna eliminate one right away, so,
Okay.
but, well, I would anticipate that we would.
Yeah,
So-
okay.
Okay, so Sarah, why don't you walk us through the 5 sites that we have identified here? And then, is there a way, I know you're really good with this GIS stuff, to pull up that site across from Holiday? And that Councilmember Fagerly talked about? And I know that one of the things that Sean, you and I talked about after the meeting was the fact that there is infrastructure in the street there. And so there's conduits for electricity, natural gas, other city facilities. So that might just eliminate that site immediately as well, so.
Can I make a suggestion? I don't know where it's the appropriate time to bring it up. I see it's in this packet in the back. But the fact that we're here talking about a city hall, it would seem appropriate to start with location B, which is our current site, to understand why we're even looking at a city hall. The assumption around the table, people that have seen this, you say, oh, well, of course we need a new city hall, but we're gonna have to answer the same questions to the public of what is the situation with the current facility and why we're even exploring it. And so I don't want to belabor it, but in the back where it talks about city offices, we've addressed this in the past, and I just want to refresh memories. Way in the back is the facility study that came out in 2016. And it was done, and it has a value they give to our current facilities from communities. It's actually all the city-owned facilities. And they went in and did a complete study of the conditions of those buildings and gave them a score between 0 and 1. And if you got a score of 1, it means the building should be bulldozed if it hasn't already fallen down. And 0 is a new building. And if you look at it, they created these numbers, and so there's one they call FCI and one they call RI. And if you're looking at those pages of the city building, the FCI is the facility condition, which they define as 1 to 5 year deficiencies over the replacement value. And for those that are newer on the council, which actually are all of the members here, you probably didn't hear this initially. I don't know if this was part of what you were going to present or not, but then there was a requirement index, which was these deficiencies plus other values over the replacement value.
Is this something you brought?
Yeah, it's also in here.
It's in the
The back of your,
Way in
the
the
back
back.
of your packet.
But what I want to point out is they have defined what the deficiencies are in this building from 1 to 5 years. And there is a sheet, and you can find it when you get there, but it'll say city offices, and it has a list of deficiencies. And then the next page is a continuation of those deficiencies. And so I guess I'm referencing these pages because this is where they determine the replacement value of this facility we're sitting in. And this was done in 2016. And to replace this building we sit in is $3.2 million, almost 3.3. And they've listed a whole litany of items here. I don't know if we have met any of these deficiencies on here, nor do I know if there are additional deficiencies since this was made. And we're almost now 2.5 years later, and according to this, that it should have again become even increasingly deficient because some of these things were critical items. So my question will be, have we met any of these, or is this, or are there additional ones, and this is even more expensive to replace? Would be one of my questions, because to fix this to where it would be functional, I think we had even Engen talk about it, and he came up with a number of 4.2 million, which is $1 million over what's here. And so we do have cited deficiencies. However, on the second page of that, on the RI value, at the bottom it talks about council chambers lacking functionality and inefficient interior space layout. These pieces go into the RI number, which does make the number of from 0 to 1 much higher. But my question will be, and this will be probably for the mayor because I don't think anyone else was around, how did those priorities get identified and put on here? This was done, I think, before any of the council members here were around. But I'm curious about that piece, because if that is a priority to address those two pieces, that does push that threshold to that 3.2 or 4.2, depends on what evaluation you look at. But I want you to see that there is this was the reasons that we're looking at for a city hall, because I know I've made many times a reference to this, that the community center was actually in a bigger state of disrepair, because it is. But this lays it out. I know after these came out, more in the time frame of everybody that's here, we did an air quality assessment of this building to see if it was indeed safe. And those came back that the air quality is fine. So I don't want it to be confused that just because the air quality of this building is fine, that doesn't make this whole list go away. And as we move and start about talking about other places, I want to also reiterate the fact that these deficiencies probably should not have gotten as big as they were. And so if we're going to even think about a new facility, that we have deferred maintenance as something we have to address, because how it got to this point I do not know, but it is out of hand. But this building cannot continue to function without an infusion of dollars to bring it up to where it needs to be. So if someone says, well, everything's just fine the way it is, that building's doesn't have an air quality issue, it does have issues, and they are defined. And so that is why we're discussing it. But I want to also point out that that is an option to stay here, but to stay here comes with this price tag as well.
So I'll try to give a little bit of background in, I guess I'm probably the only one that was around. which is scary, I guess. So what ended up happening is the council asked for a facilities assessment to be done on our buildings. And an outside consultant was contracted with that under Charlene Stevens as the city administrator. And the document was began at that time. When she put the document together, or the RFP for the document together, we identified what needed to be done organizationally to make these buildings what we would call something that we could maintain and keep up and do good work with. How we got there is that the council did not put any money towards any of the buildings, and they were just hodgepodge together, and staff would make recommendations that we need new carpeting here, and it would go to the council, and the council would cut it. Or, you know, we need to, when Mick Schmidt was here as city administrator, you know, he had numerous times that he brought to the council, we need a new city hall, and it would get brought forward, and the council would cut it. And so, what happened was, the council at the time then said we need to do a facility study. And that's the document that you're referencing. And so then, that was scored by an independent company that came out, and they do this for a living, that's what they do. And that was led by, I believe, Bruce Peterson and Sean Christensen. And so they went around and looked at all of our buildings, and they came back with this assessment. That was shortly after the $1 million+ was spent on the auditorium, really with, we're going to fix this one problem, which became something else, which became something else, which became something else. And Ms. Stevens did not want that to happen on another city building. She wanted a methodical process to be followed. So that's why she recommended to the council, which the council did support, of this facility study. And so that's the background on how that happened.
Like, and I applaud that, I think this is good. Do you know when were these the priorities of the council to add the chambers and or the other piece?
That was never, to my knowledge, and some of that happened as I was candidating for mayor, so I was not sitting at the table as the mayor. I don't recall that having a city council chambers on site was ever a council priority that had been identified. It may have informally by some council members been identified, but as a formal council action, I'm not sure that that happened.
Well, I think it was identified even by this council as an informal priority as well.
Right, when we talked about it last year, that was one of the priorities.
Correct.
Right, yeah. But I don't know that the council has ever officially, has it under your regime, ever officially adopted that we want council chambers to be within the structure of the city hall. And I mean, I think that will come with our recommendation, our first recommendation that goes to the council. I would think so. Does that help?
It does, and I apologize, but I thought it would be important to kind of start from the base of, before you start looking at other sites, that we do have a site that can be renovated, and it does have a price tag. So I think it's important as we start talking about, oh yeah, we have to purchase property, you have to prep the property, those things have to come into consideration as well, just like mitigating this property, and who you would sell it to, knowing of its deficiencies.
And the other thing we have to remember is we had the flood.
Well, that's why I knew there's that was
So-
in my head about talking about additional deficiencies, that we've also had a flood in the building.
Right,
Yeah.
and so we had the flood which happened, which kind of took this part of the building and mitigated the asbestos in this part of the building. But as you're sitting here today, you can hear the space heaters running. Came into the office yesterday morning, Mr. Holland reported to work. Some of the rooms in City Hall were 40 degrees, in the 40s. I don't think there was
My
any.
office.
I don't think there was any room any room within the city that had a temperature above 60.
Yeah, it was just, it was at capacity, it was just, it peaked out, and, yeah, we were all.
And so, I mean, so that has happened since. You know, we know that, I was sharing with Deb at the front desk, when I was a fire chief, we had a similar situation that had happened, and Rick Johnson was in charge of facilities at that time, and and he was here, because he had an alert that came across his phone. So he was here right away in the morning trying to get the heat jacked up, so by the time staff actually got here, I mean, I think it was still in the 60s, but it wasn't in the 40s. So, and part of the issue is that our maintenance person was on vacation this week, so, so of course, that's when it always happens, so. So let's go to site. I know some of you have a hard stop, and others of us don't have a hard stop, but we were initially scheduled to go to 2:30. You know, if we could run that out a little bit longer, like maybe to 2:45. It's taken us a little bit of time to get this background work done. Does that work for everybody or not?
2:45.
That works? Yeah. Okay, Sarah, bless us with your knowledge.
You wanted to start with the old Taco John site. No, I'm not 100%.
It's across from Holiday,
familiar.
so, Holiday gas station close,
Um,
come through the curve, you can do
10?
Yep.
This is a
the, oops, oops.
Oh no, that's the
Sure.
community church.
Yeah.
Yep, there it is.
Touching things, Mark.
Yeah,
So it's the
yeah, so this piece, the majority of this block is already owned by municipal utilities.
As she puts it, Mark, were you able to contact
No,
utilities? Because I know I've seen maps from the commission, and there is a lot of infrastructure.
well, she should be able to get to that on this, I think.
Okay, because they have a lot of underground infrastructure that restricted, I think, from a lot of basement digging and things in that whole area.
So it's what I'll call the western 2/3 roughly of that block, western half.
So the
Um,
footprint will work.
There is some, they've changed some settings on utilities here. So what we can see.
You should have sat over here, because I got a heater here.
Because you're in your first one. Lucky stars.
Kathy, would you pass me your phone?
I think about all the people living in the trailer
Okay.
houses.
Okay, so, as she's beginning to prepare this, let me just talk a little bit about the Rice Hospital parking lot. And Ike and I talked about that this morning because the Rice Hospital parking lot, and so that would be the area just to the east of the old ambulance garage and where their large generator sits along with some of their oxygen equipment. Our memory serves us that we are under lease with Caris Health for that property, so we'd have to break that lease and then bring that back forward. One of the things that has always been talked about is that that's prime commercial development, First Street is. And so if the council wants to talk a little bit about that, or the committee wants to talk a little bit about that, is that something we would even be interested in? Breaking that lease, we would have to then find parking for Caris Health employees, and that type of thing, but, so I believe it's listed as item B on your document, so.
D.
B as in boy.
I'm not interested in that one,
Is anybody interested in that lot?
for both of those reasons.
I think it's D on here.
D.
isn't it? It's D and John.
There are just like one page past
Oh, I'm
this
sorry.
comprehensive map, and there's
Yeah.
also some closer up images of the 5 sites that are there, just
Yeah.
while I'm trying to get this all set up.
Yeah. So yeah, so it'd be D, David. Is there any appetite for that? Okay. So then, we can talk a little bit about the E site as she's preparing, and that's the fire station site. Mr. Holland, if you wanna talk a little bit about that?
Well, obviously, there's a dry cleaners and a chiropractor's office on that facility, so I checked that out, that's 2 different parcels. And then, about 3/4 of that block is owned by the city and the fire department's location. I haven't, I have not consulted with any of the owners of those properties at all or anything like that. So I don't even know if they're willing to sell. But one of the reasons I put that in there was when we talk about a consolidated facility, one-stop location type of thing, government complex. There's more than enough space there that if we tore down the cleaners and the chiropractor, that we could build a facility on that block. It would give us nice frontage on First Street, and we could have an electronic sign out there and so forth when we're having our meetings, give public notice, and people would know where that Chambers location is. Also, it'd make for a nice entrance into the downtown area, having that new city hall there on First Street. And then plus, like I said, we already own half that block, and we could actually tie in to the fire department building if we wanted to, and co-locate. So those are some of the advantages of that site. It's not a perfect site, but it's one that I thought should be at least considered.
And so the council had looked at this site for a city hall probably 10 years ago. Wasn't it about 10 years ago, Janelle, do you remember? So, or maybe it was just staff that looked at it. I was the fire chief when it was looked at. And what we were looking at doing at that time is we were looking at changing the model on how the fire department operated to where we'd have sleepers at the station. And it was about the time that the ambulance garage was looking for a new location as well. And so that site was looked at that time for a city hall site. The council chambers, as the administrators talked, could be added to the training room, is what was talked about at that time. And then you could have your environmental services, that type of thing, all on the first floor along with reception. Second floor then would have your administrative offices, and then at that time, that's where the sleeping quarters would have been for the firefighters. And then over on the south side, that then just continued to function as it's currently was functioning. That building too, when you look at it, is non-ADA compliant, and so there's no wheelchair accessibility to that building. And so those issues would be able to be addressed at that time as well.
Well, I suppose with that building, one thing that's just because it was brought up, if you moved and built on the north side and merged that building, you'd probably have a natural council chamber piece with a much larger capacity there. And obviously, it's a very visible intersection, and it's easy to get messaging out for meetings and participation there.
For location.
But if they were going to do a separate facility, you would lose all those benefits. If they weren't going to be connected, then you'd lose the benefits.
And I don't know if there's been talk recently with I'm 2 fire chiefs ago, so I don't know if there's talk of sleepers anymore or not.
No, nothing additional.
That is the trend of the fire service. It's been that way for about 10 years, so.
Are you talking about building on the back end where where we meet sometimes in the back there, going up a couple floors? Is that what
Going
I'm
up 2
understanding?
floors is what was talked about then. I'm not proposing anything now.
Okay.
But that's
okay.
what was talked about at that time. And then like Ike and Sean had both said, you'd have good visibility there.
Correct.
But you would have to do something for parking, because you couldn't use the parking for Rice Hospital there, because they'd have to cross the street. But that parking lot is not used very much, in that location.
I think sometimes whenever there's something in the community center or the community room,
Do you need the water?
that they use, that whole parking lot is, yeah.
Right.
You'd have to add parking there.
See if we come back up. You have your password?
Because the heartburn that comes with that is, we have a paid-on-call fire department, which saves us a ton of money, probably about $3 million a year. And if you start doing stuff with impacting their ability to park, now you have a fire department that firefighters can't get to the equipment. You can't do that either.
Right.
So we would have to, we'd have to purchase the dry cleaners.
Yeah, I think for it to work, you have to buy the chiropractor and the dry cleaner building, and then I would put it to the east of building this close to First Street, and then put parking on that side, so you have parking on both sides of the current fire department building. So that would leave space for the firefighters to come in on the north side, and on the south side would be for the city hall and general public.
I would assume, do you have any kind of ideas of what you would have to pay to purchase those properties?
I've looked at, yes, I looked at the tax rolls and their values. I don't.
Well, is that number large enough where we shouldn't even be considering that?
No, it's
Even on
no
First
large,
Street?
it's no larger than some of the other properties we've looked at.
Because I like the
Cost.
properties that the city owns.
Right,
I
that's
think that's the
zero.
right price. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, I can't beat that price, you know?
And the property tax value might be one thing, but to rebuild a new facility for that building, for that business,
Sure.
and.
Replacement cost will be
Right.
different, yeah.
Well, I think that could easily be answered by simply calling and asking if they're interested at all in even the concept of selling. If they say absolutely not, then you know it's a done deal and move on. And we could know that in no time at all.
Well, the chiropractor just bought, right, from McQuinn, so that's sold within the last 2 years, so, you know, so that was a recent relocate, so we can probably find out what we paid, or what they paid for their redevelopment. And then you have an attorney in there too, don't you? Isn't, what's his name still there, the attorney that, what's his name? He specializes in estate planning.
He must be renting because he wasn't listed as an owner.
Okay. Because he's, so in this corner here, he sits right here.
I looked at it this morning, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, there's an
If
office space.
acquisition and relocation are significant, that might answer the question about that site as well.
Right, so,
And then anytime you have a dry cleaner, you have substantial environmental concerns.
So, one of the ABC.
Okay, so do you want to talk A or C or D or, let's talk C first. At the public meeting, that is where we had the most attention, which is block 50. We had the most attention from people from Bethel Church telling us they did not want that to change. And that if it did change, we'd have to do something for parking for them. And so, if you take a look at a legacy building, that building was, or that block was supposed to have been an office complex with a parking garage back in the 90s, and that fell apart.
which that's in your book too.
So, you know,
That's one location I've gotten quite a bit of pushback from the library and the church and even the hospital.
leave the hospital.
Because they park from, you know, right out here, right all the way down to the library.
But that is
That's, you know, that's.
I think the
one of-
parking lot gets a lot of use,
Oh, without a doubt, right.
from 3 different areas, so
I think if you did it there, you would have to include a parking garage.
there would be no other option, and that is another extra expense there.
Or parking ramp.
Yeah, yeah, parking ramp, right, yeah. And then, you know, as you remember, which Mr. Holland was talking about a little bit earlier, you know, his plan that he had shared with the council of connecting the,
See, with the skywalk.
yeah,
See, that was, it's in your book, this was the concept that was developed on that lot, what was that, 1989? This was a proposal with the bank, they were gonna have, private offices, city hall, and then they were gonna use the skywalk to connect to the hospital. So you could do a parking garage, skywalk, city hall, you know, and it would create quite the complex there, so.
Were there any cost estimates on the back in that day?
You know, I have, yeah,
There were,
yeah, here's, yeah, it's in the back of the
2.46
6
million.
million, yeah.
For
This
the
was
whole
back
project,
in
or just the parking
'89.
That was for acquisition, relocation, insurance, 480 spaces. That might have logged 50 projects
Yeah, it's got the pricing
In
behind it.
1989.
in 1989. Yeah.
30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
So that project is probably 12 million plus now.
Well, it's a behemoth of a building, if you look at that drawing, I mean,
Yeah.
it consumed the whole block.
It's very pretty.
Yeah.
Almost half of it was parking spaces.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah, there's been a change. MUC took off the public capability, and for some reason, this computer is not letting me put in the password to get access to that on this computer right this second. So I can look into what utilities are there. We just don't have the ability to pull them up on the screen right this second.
Okay, and so the part that we're looking at is basically,
It's this one right here.
okay, it's these 3 lots, is that what you said? 4?
3. Well, I think there's 4 there. This is a tiny little one.
Right.
So yeah, it goes up to this.
For those of you that have been around a while, it's the old Taco John's. And then the liquor store. The liquor store, the old liquor store is still there.
Yeah.
And you've been around with it, you know. It may or may not have been the place in 1974 to get alcohol.
Yeah.
What would you say, does anyone see what any advantages if we were to build on that parcel?
Well, it's owned by utilities, right?
Utilities in the city.
They're gonna
it's
give it to us?
half and half.
Half and half.
Are they gonna sell it to us?
I see.
Well, traditionally, those exchanges have happened for $1
Okay.
within the city.
Well, those are out of your downtown parameters, are they not?
No, it's within it because the downtown
Highway
counter goes,
12
yeah.
is on the other side.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Well, I'm talking old highway. So I'm talking this,
Well, it would have been Benson Avenue. or-
Benson Avenue there, when you get to there, it's Benson Avenue, correct? Yeah.
We probably all remember the presentation that John Herring did when they were looking at that property for the utilities and they rolled it out because of all the underground infrastructure. So, you know, if it didn't work for them to move it, is it gonna work for us to move all the infrastructure? I doubt it.
Right. And
And you know, this was brought up by Councilmember Fagerly, and he was not at that meeting, if you remember, so he would not have been privy to that at the time. And made that recommendation.
And it's a major thoroughfare, again, that might be a commercial area for private sector. Not that we have to be on the back streets, but that could be a prime location.
Okay? So then, let's go to, which we have options A and B. Who would like to take, which would you like to talk about that next?
Hey, let's just go alphabetical.
Okay, A. So, this is the site that Julie brought up at the retreat. So I had also looked at that site, and one of the things that I had talked with the administrator about was if we, and as the administrator did share, you know, there has been conversation, because in the community, there's been talk that, you know, the city's gonna buy this property from Quick Trip. Well, when we started hearing all that, we talked to Quick Trip, because we thought, well, maybe it is for sale. And they told us, no, it's not. So they have no intent of selling it, so, but what I talked to the administrator about was, could we block off Benson Avenue? And then that would give us some additional thoroughfare space. And then talk with Quick Trip about putting some type of a green space on the west side of their location. And then you would have a downtown park Because one of the problems that we have in the downtown area is we have people that live there with children, and there's no place for the kids to play. So that would be a conversation that possibly could happen if you identified that site. That site, the city owns a good portion of that. Sherry, do you know what percentage of, you know?
Yeah, about half of it. Up to these roughly north and south parcels. Here we own that block, that portion. So we own the west half,
We
basically.
don't own all 4 of those
Yep,
on that far side?
yep,
The west, yeah.
around the west, yep.
And so if you took then, and if you looked at expanding the footprint there a bit, so if you went over to the last one that runs between Benson and Wilmer, or Benson and 12, right, that line, and you took everything to the west of that, from there over, and that's where you put your footprint of your building, you would have parking space there, and then you have overflow parking in the county office building space, which I believe is a joint project between the county and the city, right?
Yeah, I think this eastern portion of the county property is 10-hour parking, and
Yep.
then there's some 2-hour parking up here too, but.
And then the city already maintains that site as far as snow plowing and stuff for them. I think that agreement went in place probably in the, do you remember when that, you were here then? You were working with Mel.
Probably right about when I moved there.
Or was
I
that
think
then?
when-
Yeah, I was here.
I asked Gary one time about it, cause he was telling me all the stuff that we plowed. I thought he said when they took possession, but, no?
I was here when they took that, when they started plowing that one.
Okay.
And I came in 2000.
So we wouldn't be looking at buying out the little Quonset guy, cause I know he, of that business, cause I know that he didn't wanna sell out to,
Marketing concepts.
Yeah.
Right. That would all, I mean, that would, we'd have to turn that over to the administrator to go and do his magic, but, you know, that lot sold not that long ago for not that much money, but, you know,
What are the 3 that go all the way through, the next 3 properties after the 4 the city owns?
They're all owned by the same person. It's the old owners of Nelson Laundry.
I see, and do we know, you have acquisition costs for those 3 lots?
No, I've looked at, so the tax values of it, and I know that one of our, council members informed me, that they're related to that person, or the owner part, some conflict with that.
I know, that's why I'm
They
here.
wanted to make sure that I knew
Yeah.
that. But
okay.
no, I don't know what the value would be.
Okay, that would be an important piece for this, I'll have to know that.
Okay.
well, I think Doug Fenstra put that agreement together. Yeah, that property was on the market, so, there probably is a listing for it someplace. I'm not sure if it was a public listing or if it was a private listing.
Okay, we've kind of touched on this before, is the IT needs for A, and I know we talked about Block 50, that we wouldn't have to move everything.
Well, I think when you start talking about a building that's in the $4 million range, if you spend $10,000 to move a line, it's not a lot of money in
Is that all
relationship.
that's involved?
No, it's gonna be, I just talked to Ross again this morning, I told him, I showed him this map, and I asked him about the cost and which would be easiest, or would he wanna be in a separate location, co-located?
Right.
What if we locate up here? Because him and I have had conversations over the last year, so I wanted to refresh it, and so he did this morning, and it would be more like $100,000, okay?
Those
each
numbers,
person would-
every time I hear those numbers, and this is the frustrating thing, every time I hear a number, it's different.
Okay.
So let's get a number,
Well,
let's get a number and get it written down,
it's,
so it doesn't continue to
it
change.
changes with each location, is what I'm saying. So with,
Let's go back and look at what we were told at the retreat, because at the retreat, we were given a number and it wasn't 100,000.
was 100,000 on that sheet that I put in the book, and it's in this book too. But anyway,
Let's get a figure for every location that has not been ruled out for our
Okay.
next meeting.
okay. So with A, you have the advantage, you have the trunk line is what we're talking about, a trunk line. That's the T1 line, that's your most expensive, is your fiber optics. And so the county has that T1 line, and so then we could work out an agreement to tap into that T1 line, okay? The fire department is on a separate line that runs from that facility down to our current site, you know. If we were to move that, we would have to move the fire department line and also, the wastewater treatment facility plant, and all their cabling as well as the police department. So, you know, actually, the city hall, he told me, again, is the lowest user, really. It's all of our outside departments that create most of the traffic and the needs. And so, anyway, that's what I talked to him about. Also, I know everyone's wanting us, you know, a hard number, but I did talk to him about it, and that's why I showed him these 5 or 6 different sites, and I said, we need to look at some numbers, because I knew that was coming down the pike, that everybody wants to know what those numbers are. So he will do that, but of course, if we stayed at our current location, we get our trunk line from across the street at the county building. Okay, that's where our main trunk line is, except for the fire department. It comes actually, what street is that? It's not Trout, it's Becker, the one I drive every day. Right, so that's, you know, expensive if you have to move that.
Okay, one of the other things that was kind of kicked around
Yeah,
was if they stayed on the west side or the administrative side of the city auditorium.
And
And we put an elevator in.
we
the
put an
outside.
elevator in, we'd have to put some heating and cooling and redo those offices. And, you know, and which we could do on the second floor over there, and that's one possibility. So most of our costs for there would be, you know, renovating those, that second floor and the elevator, of course, and then the HVAC for that facility. And then you still have a little bit of fiber to move. So-
Okay, well, how much appetite was there for that? Because there's a part of me that we go back to the money that we're gonna have to sink into the city auditorium.
Right,
How do you justify,
right,
and what usability do you get out of that? If that is the IT headquarters,
right.
then it makes a little more
It's-
sense.
I like everything you just said, because that's the way I'm thinking is, you know, we've got $1 million in the basement, okay? We're gonna keep that building, let's utilize that, put the RAC 8, put the IT department all in that facility, renovate it, and that will ensure the longevity also of that facility. And then the rest of the building can be decided later on how we're gonna use that, whether it's for recreation or for some other purpose. But I think that that would be money well invested.
Does that eliminate the issue of the cost then? You still have to run lines over to A.
You're still
Or-
gonna have to, run fiber to those other sites, yes.
Would it be less if IT was here,
Would it,
in the city auditorium? No. Oh.
You know, the thing that we gotta remember is, and I don't remember who made the comment, but in one of the presentations we had, Bruce Miles, at the retreat, he said that when he was working with the city of Andover, they had talked about not even running fiber, that in not very many years, fiber's gonna be obsolete, and it's all gonna be done through microwave links. And, you know, maybe we look at what that cost would be, and he had a name for it, I can't remember.
well, the T1 lines, and there's T1, T2, and so, like, the biggest user for a T1 line, I can tell you, it's probably the, you know, our tech park, but number 2 is probably Caris Hospital, because of all the data that they have to transfer and use with all the tech equipment that they have. So you're gonna have that fiber in the downtown. That's a good thing,
Yeah.
because that's where, so that reduces our costs when we have to do extensions and so forth.
Yeah, because we just granted them an easement in the last few months to do some of their lines, so. You know, one of the things that was talked about, when you start talking about B then, which we talked about in our subcommittee earlier, was,
I was just gonna say, are we done with the A, the conversation of A?
no, I think we ended up heading over there, and I just kinda wanted to,
All right, have we eliminated C, D, and E on cost prohibited or too much disruption of existing usage?
I think D we've eliminated, I don't know if we've eliminated the other two,
Okay.
have we?
I don't have an appetite for C, knowing that there's a public distaste for that lot and, you know, folks that are opposed to that. And the cost of, I can't imagine the cost of a parking ramp would make it a viable option.
Because I guess as I'm looking at it, is if we're gonna try to get to some kind of consensus, there's a lot of unknowns we haven't explored on many of these, because I guess we wanted to know if there's even an appetite to do so. And so I guess what I was hearing from is the first conversations, I thought we were sort of going, these look fairly cost prohibited, or they were very disruptive to the existing usage. But I'm wondering is, you know, because for A, what I would like to see next time, if that's still a viable option, is what are the acquisition costs for the property there, and what it's gonna talk to bring in IT lines, is we have adequate electrical, sewage, all of those questions, we need those all articulated. We can't just go, well, it's very scenic. I wanna know what is going to
Sure.
be the cost to do that there. And I would, as we shift to B, the same questions are there, and I'm gonna assume B is gonna be acceptable in one piece, second piece, third piece would be up for debate, but the existing facility, or if you go to the auditorium or whatever, there's still gonna be all the same expenses.
There's gonna be some costs, but it's, you know, as far as like moving the IT part of it, that's what I'm saying.
I understand
That's the
that.
lowest. It's the remodel and everything in the elevator that drives the costs up for moving to the auditorium.
Okay, so, trying to move us along but not hurry us, would there be consensus at this point that we have staff, hone in on site A and B for our next meeting? Because we have about 3 minutes. Okay, so then let's take those other four, take those other 4 projects off at this point, put them in a parking lot. So we're not gonna talk about them, we're not gonna kill them totally, but we're gonna keep them as conversation pieces. And then at that point, we're to the point of, what I heard Sean say is he wants some prices on acquisition, T1 lines, and to make sure that we have sewer, water,
All the infrastructure.
everything, all the infrastructure for those 2 sites to move forward. Okay, so then we need to select a chair and a vice chair. So, one of the things I think when you're looking at a chair and vice chair, it's gonna take a fair amount of work. We need someone that, you know, can have that vision of getting that work done, and how to, like Fernando was talking earlier, you know, how we do that consensus when we start going through the individual things and prioritization, scoring and all that. So that's kind of what I think we should be looking at, and I'd leave it up to the committee to, who's interested in that type of thing, so.
I would be interested in chairing.
I would make that nomination, and if Kathy Schwantes be the chair of the building
I would
committee.
second that.
Okay, how about, is there any opposition to that?
Are we able to make motions at this since it's a task force?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think what he's saying is he supports it, I think is what I heard him say.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
And then vice chair, who would like to do the vice chair piece?
I can do that. Unless somebody else is really wanting it, I would give them that opportunity.
Well, I think it's good if you did it because you were on the
Yeah.
original position. Yeah, so you have the historical knowledge. Okay,
Did you want to chair it, given, I didn't even think about
Nope.
that, given your past history.
That's fine.
confirm meeting date, time, and location frequency. I think that I would like us to meet regularly until we get this information. Ike, how long do you think it's gonna take you to get this data for us?
I think next week I should be able to have all this, I hope, you know, as long as I can reach everybody, the owners of those properties.
So do you have a calendar there?
I do.
Wednesdays do not work. We want to move our meetings to noon. It just works better. So let's leave them on Thursdays at noon, and our next meeting will be Thursday at noon. The 14th, does that work? Oh, we can bring roses for everybody. It's Valentine's Day.
Or chocolate.
Or chocolate. Chocolate's always good.
Okay,
Are we okay with that?
yep.
Noon?
Wait a minute, let me check.
14th.
February
at noon.
14th.
They'll have Valentine's Days.
You may wanna make a phone call to, the court as well and see. Because there are rumors of that again, but it'd be a quick call, see if there's any validity to wanting to relocate out to the.
Oh.
I had that conversation. When was that?
That conversation comes up frequently, but it'd be one that
They have,
maybe
they have no
wanna
money.
field it again, just to put a feeler out.
That is.
I had lunch with Larry today.
I know, I understand.
Oh yeah, you saw me.
I saw you, so yeah.
Well, that, it's the courts though.
I know.
That comes from was
Oh.
it District 5?
Okay.
So the funding doesn't come.
District
this-
8.
District
Give
8.
them a jingle.
If we
See
could
if
get
there's any-
timing, if we could, yeah, if the
That works for me.
timing would fall into place, bingo.
Just give them, just give them a call.
Okay.
I don't, so just confirm.
Yeah.
Is there a time?
Does that work for everyone else?
I'll put it down noon on.
Is early in the day easier? or-
I'm supposed to be marshal that day, but I can,
Okay.
I'll rearrange.
Really?
Okay. Any other closing comments before we adjourn for today? We got some really good work done. Our next meeting, we will plan on 1 hour. Staff will have the information that we've asked them to prepare, which is the acquisition costs and making sure the utilities would be supported on sites A and sites B.
And do you want to meet back here or out front? We picked this room because of the monitor.
I think the front room would be better going forward, we'd have more room.
Okay. Okay.
I appreciate having that available today, unless you expect that we're gonna need it again.
There's a monitor in that front room, it's just not as conveniently located, but it's probably, the equipment is probably a little bit more reliable. There can be a little bit of trick with this particular monitor to get everything functioning, so I think the front room would be fine.
It is big and expensive, it is unfortunate.
It's the mouse and the keyboard, that part's great. The little things.
Yeah, it's a little.
I wanna say thank you to staff for putting this together. This is a great book, and it will give us some very good reading material so that we can all be up to speed and from the same place when we meet the next time around, so thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
So is it gonna be up to the chair to do the agenda?
Double check on, but for the most part,
And
yes.
you,